So let's talk about a couple of specific strategies. We have a number of attendees on the call today, and I imagine if we were to really go down the list, we would hear almost as many different versions of the way education is working in their particular school or district. And so I'm going to talk using broad strokes. I'm going to really challenge the attendees today to think about, well, how might I use this tool that I know about and tailor it to my particular class and situation? So, uh, um, as we talked about at the beginning, we have to make sure that the students are feel safe, secure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But there's really no replacement for strong curricula, and that's one of the things I think when educators and parents did some Monday morning quarterbacking and looked with 2020 hindsight and over the summer what happened in the spring is that because there was such an abrupt transition, it was very hard to come up with consistent curricula across all those weeks. I think a lot of people kept hoping it was going to be over and we wouldn't have to do this anymore, and then it just kept persisting. So one of the real challenges for this year is knowing that there's a little bit of burnout in the rearview mirror for the children and the parents if there's remote or hybrid instruction. It's really re-engaging with the passion you had as an educator when you started in the field and figuring out how to be engaging, fun, interactive, and use some of these technological tools that do allow us to do remote instruction, perhaps in new ways or in ways that mimic some of the things that really work in a whole class setting. So just for an example, some of the online portals for large class meetings allow for breakout rooms. That might be a way to help students work together and it would break up some of the lecturing or just looking at the screen. It gives them an opportunity to do some of the things that they really enjoy doing when they're in an in-class setting if they happen to be on remote instruction. You could also arrange for team projects that students would have to connect and figure out how to do outside of any of the formal class lectures or meetings. And that might be a way to think about varying the type of engagement that students have with your whole class. It's also the case that in any kind of learning situation, the adult is usually providing corrective feedback if something's not quite right or the student needs some additional support. But they should also be catching the kid being good, noting when they do things the right way. Because anytime anybody's learning a new skill, it's rarely that it happens right away. Most of the times, the new skill develops in small steps. Reflect back on anybody with the call who has a child. When they were learning to walk, you didn't stand with your arms crossed at the other end of the room and wait until they walked fluidly all the way from the coffee table they pulled themselves up on over to you. And then you said, "Good job. I'm really proud of you. Now you're a walker." Right? You got excited when they pulled themselves up on the edge of the coffee table. You got excited when they scooted along. You showed that you're excited by a lot of attention, a lot of encouragement. As they took their first couple wobbly steps, you might start clapping and get very excited. Well, that same approach was always embedded in classrooms as students were learning phonemic awareness, as students were learning how to add or subtract. Teachers were doing that kind of routinely. Now, if we reflect on what a remote instruction approach is like, it's a little more challenging to do that because an educator has divided attention. They're looking at a number of squares, a number of different environments. Might be harder to interact with students fluently because they're on mute or they're not on mute, that sort of thing. So when we think about this same principle in a remote instruction environment, I would think about maybe starting to try to incorporate some more personal communications, either through a text or an email, as much as is possible. If you notice something that was good, reaching out. And something I guess that might be a theme underlying all of these suggestions or strategies is that the caregivers are our allies in a remote instruction environment. And what we have to be very careful about is we don't know what the home situation is like for any particular caregiver. The only thing we know is that every situation is different. And it may be easy for a caregiver to get burned out if they're just having trouble logging on. They forgot their password for the school-based portal, or they might not understand how to do the particular assignment that the children were given. It's been a long time since they've been in school. And so sharing some successes that the child has achieved with the caregiver may go a long way in helping them keep the momentum, as we know that this is going to be some time that we're going to be in this uneasy situation that we could be shifting rapidly between both remote and in-class instruction. Something else that I'm always humbled when I go in and observe classrooms and get a chance to see is that educators implement academic response opportunities every chance they can get. They're naturals at this, right? They're trying to get children to apply the material they learned in new situations, extend what they have already shown that they know how to do to a new interaction or a new assignment. And academic response opportunities in classrooms often work quite well because you have the whole class in front of you. You can be walking around, calling on students randomly to answer. If a student is in a remote instruction environment, I think we have to think a little more carefully about this, that it's easy to hide yourself as a student, right? In fact, a lot of the parents that we talked to over the summer said that their child would just turn off their camera, or they'd turn the monitor to the side so they weren't on the camera anymore. And then they could disengage and they wouldn't have to pay as much of attention. Uh, I think one of the things that we want to think really carefully about in both always in class and in hybrid and in remote situations is to be having the children doing a lot of the talking, because that helps me as the educator know through my own formative assessments whether or not they're really understanding or grasping the concepts that we're talking about. The the other thing that might be important to think about this year in terms of instruction are what's called major concept summaries. So at the outset, there was some mention about the COVID-19 slide. You know, there's always been this knowledge of the summer slide between the end of June and then the beginning of the next school year. If you look at students' achievement, there's sometimes a step back because they're not getting the reps that they get all throughout the whole school year of practicing these academic concepts and reading lots of words. And if they're out in their backyard all summer, or they're not spending a lot of time reading or practicing their math facts, they become less fluent, and that can impact their academics. Well, if we reflect on all the children coming back to school this fall, a concern is that there's been a lot of variability in the academic reps that have been available between the middle of March and then heading towards September. And there may have been some children that got just as many reps as they would have gotten had they been in class from March until June. We also know that there are some children, some through no fault of their own, either because of lack of technology or connectivity issues, or there wasn't a caregiver who could be available to support them in their learning, that they may not have gotten the reps that they needed. And so the gap between the students who are returning in terms of what they know and what they're able to convey may be larger than what we would typically see given a typical school year. And so I think it's on all educators to remind themselves that we have to continuously summarize key points, skills, or concepts. And I might even have to do that in a way that seems a little overboard, because I'm trying to make sure whoever is the farthest behind in terms of their knowledge or fluency with these concepts gets it and starts to integrate it into the scaffold that they have in their mind of what they're supposed to do. This might be particularly important in a remote instruction situation. It's going to include repeating concepts frequently or asking the children to repeat back what the key concept or the key point was, checking for understanding. If you think about what a law professor might do, they would just randomly call on one person. Greg, what was the main point of what we just said? Then all students have to be paying attention because they never know when that question is going to be directed to them. And then the other thing, again, teachers do this naturally. I don't want to belabor this point, but looking for gaps in completed work is going to be a way that you can do some formative assessment to know if there's a area of the content that needs more remediation or needs some more discussion. Perhaps we're going to get into the part here where these are the tomorrow strategies, things that teachers can do tomorrow. One of the great things about being a child and really even being an adolescent and even an early adolescent is that the adults take most of the heat off you in worrying about everyday things. In fact, we know one of the signals of normative child development is really an ignorance of a lot of the tough things that can go on in the world. And in fact, children who have been subjected to trauma or who have had difficult situations they've had to manage, we know that that's one of the difficulties with them is that their cognitive development has a hard time understanding what's going on. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a stress that has touched everybody. It would be impossible to shield children from the stress or the anxiety that's just present in our entire world. And so, one of the ways that we can really help children cope is to provide some more predictability in their daily life. They're coming from 6 months of unpredictability, right? Nobody knew what was going to happen next. Uh, Educators, through clear structure, clear routines, and directly explained rules, can help again provide some of that stability in children's lives. And a direct effect of that should be to reduce anxiety, because now children, if they know what to expect and what they have to do, and that the adults are in charge and taking care of things, that's a nice place to be as a child. If things are unclear and they keep changing and it's frustrating or irritating, and then I look to my parent and even they don't know what to do, that's a tough place to be for a kid. So one of the real important things to think about is what schedule is going to be run for the upcoming school year, and understand that it might need to be agile, it might need to be flexible, but that schedule is going to be one that we run for the whole school year. That means starting and ending on time. It means providing an advanced organizer. You might include some standard procedures at the beginning and end of every class lesson that you do, both in person and online, so that you're linking those two things together. That becomes predictable. That's going to help kids habituate back into the typical school schedule. One of my main concerns, something that I work with a lot of kids with challenging behaviors, and I always think of them as having a deficit in terms of the nice things said to them, right? That they're always corrected. Don't do that, put that down, get away, stop that, knock it off. And they don't get a lot of, I'm proud of how responsible you just were. That was a really nice example of cooperation that I just saw. Those kinds of things don't happen as much for kids with challenging behaviors because they get corrected a lot. I think we can now generalize that to a wider range of kids that may not have been getting positive attention for things, and may have actually been in stressful situations in a small home living situation with other siblings and parents who've been stressed because of work situations or changes in their own lives. And so catching kids being good, acknowledging appropriate behavior, balancing that across all the students in your class is really important. And I also note down here again, copy the caregiver. If you can let them know that you notice something nice about your child or their child, that's going to be an important thing going forward. I'm going to skip a little bit over these examples of effective and ineffective requests, but what I would like to say is that this is a year that teachers that have clear routines, have clear rules, and have clear expectations, they're ahead of the game, because that's going to allow them to shift agilely from different learning modalities if necessary. It's going to help the child know what they need to do and allow them to comply. And it's also going to help the parent know what needs to be done, because the worst position in the world for a parent is to be relying on your child for accurate information. Children often are amongst our poorest of reporters on what's true. That's especially true if it relates to a academic demanding task. They sometimes seem to shift their point of view towards, oh, we don't have to do that, or that's optional. The clearer the phrasing and the more direct in the phrasing, the better off the kids are going to be. So issue assignments in manageable steps, break them down. If it's online or remote, something that's going to be really important is to perhaps have written instructions and put yourself in the shoes of the parent or caregiver or the child who may not be as knowledgeable about an online environment and might get stuck at the login page and not even get to the really good lesson planning that was embedded in the assignments or the lectures that they were supposed to watch. And would also suggest using similar instructions across the week and across the modalities that you're in. Something else that I think is important for all of us to acknowledge is that this is not an easy time for anybody. It's certainly not an easy time for educators. I'm humbled to look and see the educators working hard to make the environment safe for the kids, and they have lots of concern about the kids, and many are putting their feelings about the children that they're teaching, about their own concerns and their own worries. And I think we can predict that the return to school is going to be rocky to some degree for some kids as they get used to these rules and structures and routines again. And so planned ignoring is a good strategy to use in this situation. This is a case where educator chooses their battles. Certainly, you wouldn't allow a child to be disrespectful to you. Children shouldn't be swearing in school. They shouldn't be aggressive. But if a child does some mild complaining or maybe some fidgeting, or they're doing something that's irritating, but it's not really something we would make a federal case over, and they're doing the work or participating otherwise, planned ignoring can be a good strategy for that, and just continue to compliment or notice or acknowledge the good things that they're doing. And if it's something that is annoying you and another child in class isn't doing it, you can differentially acknowledge them for doing this thing that you like. The last thing I would think about embedding into all lessons this year, again, because children's attention stamina might not be as strong as it was given the long layoff from really formal school settings. PreMed contingencies are a good example of something you can do. PreMed contingencies put a less preferable activity before a more preferable activity. When you clean your room, then you can go outside. When you eat your vegetables, then you can have dessert. When you clean up this toy, then you can take another one off the shelf. PreMed contingencies might be useful when we think about our lessons that we're teaching students across different grade levels, really K through 12, where we can let children know when we finish this, then we can do a group game, or when we're finished with this lecture, then you can be put in a breakout room and you can have some time to talk to your classmates. That sort of thing might help kids stay on task because they know there's something good coming after the activity that might be more academically or attention demanding, and it puts things in the right order, right? The PreMed contingencies are why we don't get paid on Monday. We get paid on Friday after we put in our work week.